The government has warned that the UK could lose free trade deals with more than 70 non-EU countries if there is a no-deal Brexit. Ministers are hoping to replicate the arrangements negotiated with the EU with bilateral deals, but they say they might not have exactly the same benefits. The agreements cover 12% of the UK's trade. It is all part of the fourth batch of contingency papers that have been issued by the government today. They include a warning that Eurostar rail services could be suspended unless there's a special agreement with France. Well, let's find out some of the details, a little more detail with our political correspondent, Chris Mason. You've had a lot of reading to do this afternoon, Chris. There is, in all seriousness, there's so much to go through. Just give us a flavour of everything that the government's talking about again here today.
Yeah, afternoon to you, Jane. There's two strands to the argument that's going on at the moment around Brexit, and they are very distinct. One is this, which is the whole discussion about what happens if there is a no deal. In other words, we leave the European Union at the end of March next year and there is no withdrawal agreement, and it's what some have labelled a chaotic Brexit. Certainly a lot would change very quickly. Now, the government has been putting out tranches of papers for each individual industry it thinks could do with one, setting out the government's plans in that eventuality. The first tranche appeared in the middle of August. This was the fourth. By my calculation, we're up to 104 of these papers now, with 105th that's due to be published any moment now. Wasn't published earlier this afternoon due to market sensitivity, we were told. As you say, amongst those today, the talk about trade deals, the trade deals that we are currently a part of as a result of being a member of the European Union, that we would no longer be a part of in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Pretty significant contribution they make in terms of overall UK trade. Concern as well expressed in these no-deal papers around travel contingencies, the practicalities of travelling to the continent, travelling to the EU in the event of a no-deal Brexit. They warn, for instance, that it might be wise to buy flexible tickets for using services like the Eurostar rail connection from London to France and Belgium, because there could be disruption getting across the border, and therefore a more flexible ticket might allow you to travel on it if the train you were hoping to catch doesn't happen or is delayed or whatever. So that's one suggestion. There's another additional suggestion in connection to the consequences of travelling around services that you might be subscribed to on the internet, the likes of Spotify and Netflix, and the potential that they could be blocked when you're travelling abroad, that you wouldn't be able to access your normal services. Also, real detail for individual sectors. So, for instance, there's a paper today about horse passports, which might sound quite trivial, but the industry is huge, particularly the industry between the Republic of Ireland and the UK. In other words, between the EU and the UK after Brexit, and the consequences in terms of the paperwork that would be required when the UK would become a third country, to use the EU parlance, in the event of a no-deal Brexit. So a huge amount of detail there, very sector-specific, industry-specific detail, but the government attempting to set out the consequences of and the mitigation work it is doing in the event of no deal being arrived at in the next couple of months.
Yes, you've probably still got some reading to do, but before we let you go, just a word as well, Chris, today about the continuing politics of all of this, because a lot of debate today about a customs union, whether this country will stay in a customs union post-March 2019. Cabinet ministers, some of them not at all happy about that idea. Where are we with that discussion and that debate?
Yeah, so we've parcelled up and had our conversation, Jane, about no deal. Now let's talk about a deal. If there is a deal in the next couple of months, a withdrawal agreement, what we know is that that will include a transition period that will start at the end of March next year, when Brexit legally happens, and it'll run for just under 2 years until the end of 2020. This whole round now forms around what happens at that point if there isn't a trade agreement, a future agreement, that prevents a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Now, the EU has suggested this idea where Northern Ireland stays closer to the EU in terms of its regulations than the rest of the UK. That's unpalatable to the British government because it effectively puts a border down the Irish Sea. The latest thing being suggested is that the UK as a whole would stay in a customs union, but there is then a row about for how long, because the EU is not likely to want to put a time limit on such a thing. but the UK politically and those in government and Downing Street have said that there would be a time limit. Downing Street suggesting today a time limit of about a year until the end of 2021. Here is Dominic Raab, the Brexit Secretary, on this very theme this afternoon.
It would have to be finite, it would have to be short, and it would have to be, I think, time limited in order for it to be sported here. What we cannot do is see the United Kingdom locked in via the back door to a customs union arrangement which would leave us in an indefinite limbo. That would not be leaving the EU.
And of course, into all of this mix is the Democratic Unionist Party. Clue is in the title, Unionist, Northern Ireland's biggest political party, propping up the government at Westminster, who are desperate to ensure that, firstly, in their view, that there is a clean and proper Brexit, but secondly, that there is absolutely nothing that amounts to a division between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK.
Chris, for now, thank you very much. Chris Mason there. Back to his reading material. We are going to find out what is happening in Brussels as well. We've been checking in every day with our correspondent there, Adam Fleming, who's following all the negotiations. And Adam, very good evening to you. We have had some further comments today from Jean-Claude Juncker. Bring us up to date with that.
I was just going to say this is like a very grown-up version of the podcast that me and Chris Mason do, Brexit Cast, but he's probably gone now to go back and do that reading that you were talking about. The truth is, we don't really know a lot about what is going on behind closed doors. As I've been saying all week, the negotiators have gone into what they call the tunnel, and they will only tell us what they've negotiated when they get to the end. Although we may get a clue this evening, because ambassadors from the 27 other EU countries are having a meeting right now. Half of them are in Luxembourg, and half of them are in Brussels, and they're being updated by Michel Barnier's deputy by video conference about how the negotiations have gone this week, although it's not clear how substantive and serious that discussion will be, or if it will be pretty general and it will just be a bit of mood music. But trust me, we will all be calling our ambassadorial contacts in the next couple of hours in search of any clues whatsoever. What I'm hearing is that there's been progress on the issues of Gibraltar and the British military bases on Cyprus and how the withdrawal agreement applies to them. Depending on who you speak to, that's been agreed or very nearly close to being agreed. Over the weekend, there are going to be talks here in Brussels. They're counting as working days, Saturday and Sunday this time round, because things are getting so close. The talks then will talk about the governance of the withdrawal agreement. That's how you settle disputes that arise between the two sides after the agreement has been signed. And that old chestnut, the geographical indications, the protection for regional products like feta cheese and champagne and Belgian sausages and things like that, which is still a sticking point and is a big issue for the EU, but is still unresolved. And as for the other big unresolved issue, the Northern Irish backstop that Chris was talking about there, frankly, who knows what is going on in those negotiations? Incredibly sensitive and incredibly secretive.
All right, Adam, again, for now, we'll be talking plenty next week, but thanks very much for now. Adam Fleming there in Brussels.